So throughout this whole time, she has been a silhouette in NamUs. And she wasn't entered into NamUs until quite a long time after she went missing. And so even in the past 5 years, I've contacted them, I've uploaded a picture, and it's never been put with her face. I was able to reach out to the FBI in New Mexico because they do have a monthly list with all of the Native Americans and Navajo Nation tribal members that are missing. And so they did upload her picture. But until I went to CrimeCon and started, talking in the media about my story, they entered her picture about 3 weeks ago into me finally after 23 years. There was nothing even until very, very recently. The current stories you're seeing are from the past, maybe since May. And I've been representing her family for 23 years. There was zero coverage.
That's Darlene Gomez, an attorney who specializes in tribal law and who lives in northern New Mexico. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Darlene Gomez has been practicing law for more than 2 decades and specializes in Indian law and complex family law, and has been a tireless advocate on behalf of missing and murdered Indigenous people and their relatives. A lifelong native of New Mexico, more than 23 years ago, Darlene's friend and relative, Melissa Montoya, disappeared in Dulce, New Mexico, on the Jicarilla Apache Reservation. Darlene remembers Melissa as a quiet woman with a big smile who she always thought was beautiful. Now Darlene calls Melissa just another, quote, faceless silhouette who was, quote, loved by so many people who did not get closure. Days before Melissa disappeared, she warned family and friends that something bad might happen to her. Darlene says that Melissa was in fear and had been the victim of domestic violence, including years of being in a violent relationship with somebody who is not a member of her tribe. Many agencies investigated Melissa's death. They included tribal, local police, local sheriff's deputies, federal law enforcement, and state police in New Mexico and Colorado. But no one was able to figure out enough to bring charges. The best break in more than a decade came earlier this year when a woman reached out to Darlene saying that while she was looking for a missing relative who disappeared in California, she found what appeared to be remains in the area where Melissa was last seen. Through the woman's research, she thought it might be Melissa, and authorities later determined the remains belonged to a Native woman somewhere between her 30s and her 60s. Hopes were dashed, however, earlier this year when further testing revealed that it was likely a man. Darlene's search for answers in Melissa's case has led her to this work of advocacy and representation of relatives of missing and murdered Natives and their families. People in Native communities go missing and experience violence at disproportionate rates. A 2016 study by the National Institute of Justice found that more than 4 in 5 Native women had experienced violence in their lifetimes, including 56% who have experienced sexual violence. In 1 year, as opposed to their lifetime, according to the report, 40% of Native women had experienced violence then. Darlene helps families navigate the complex web of tribal, local, state, and federal officials in helping bring justice for individuals and families, but she also advocates on the state and national level to bring about change. Darlene is the attorney for the family of Jamie Yazzie, a 24-year-old Navajo Nation woman last seen in Arizona within the boundaries of the reservation. She was last seen in July 2019, and her body was found with a gunshot wound to the back of her head across the border in the Hopi Indian Reservation in 2021. Her 30-year-old boyfriend, Trey James, was convicted of her murder in 2023. In the Navajo Nation, the rate of homicide is 4 times the national average, and that doesn't account for the long-weathered bodies where the cause of death cannot be determined, or the people who can never be found. There are only 205 patrol officers and 27 criminal investigators for a population of 174,000 people. The homicide clearance rate is far below the national average. Basically, they've made homicide legal in parts of Indian country. I want to thank my friend and my listener, Sophie, for the idea for this episode in the sense that she's inspired me to cover issues related to missing and murdered Native women. She really gave me the inspiration through opening my eyes over the last 6 to 8 months to the challenges that these communities are facing. Today, we're going to discuss the challenges for Native communities when it comes to criminal justice, the difficulties for relatives of missing and murdered Indigenous people, the complications of these cases, individual stories from Darlene's career, and a better path toward justice. Hey, Darlene, I just wanted to thank you. I really appreciate you coming on to talk about what I think are really important topics. I first came across you. I had gone to a talk at CrimeCon 2024 where you actually spoke in a way about missing and murdered Indigenous people in a way that I hadn't really heard before, which was the powerful personal story, but the big picture in a way that I don't hear a lot of people talk about it. And I thought, one of the things that you brought that I don't often see on a lot of issues, not just this issue, is the powerful personal story, but the knowledge and information that might lead us towards solutions, that big picture. So I was really impressed by your talk. And I tried to find you afterwards. I could not find you afterwards, but I'm glad that we were able to connect.
Well, I'm glad you were there.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy for this opportunity.
Yeah, it was just a neat experience. And I was glad this year that they put more of a focus than I had seen before on what I would call sort of the invisible victims, the people of color, including, Black families, Native families, and others who are suffering without the help that other people sometimes receive. I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about something you talked about at CrimeCon, and that was the disappearance of your friend and your family friend, Melissa Ann Montoya, in New Mexico. And my understanding from what you said, she had gone missing on St. Patrick's Day in 2001. And, I had read when I looked her up afterwards that her family had known that you had been studying law at the University of New Mexico. They were reaching out to people for help, and they thought you might be able to, provide them some legal or practical advice. And it kind of struck me that you had your first sort of missing and murdered Indigenous woman's case before you actually graduated law school and became an attorney. Could you tell me a little bit about like your relationship with Melissa, how you met her, and eventually what happened?
Sure. And actually, this was my second case because my first case was the case of Betty Lee, who was killed by the serial killer Robert Fry in Farmington, New Mexico. So that was
Oh, wow.
for as an intern. But when it
Wow.
came to Melissa's case, our families had been friends for probably since the early 1900s. So she's always been a part of my family because we share the same aunt together. So
How'd you guys first meet?
ever since when I was little, her parents would come to my parents' house and they would have coffee and talk together. And then as I got older, she was a couple years younger than my older brother. And then my parents owned a 7-Eleven, so I saw her quite often at the 7-Eleven because we come from a small community of probably about 3,500 people.
Oh, so you all knew each other, even so. In a way, you were all family, even if you weren't related. What did you? How? What was the difference between your ages?
We're about 12 years in difference of age. She was
Okay,
4 years older.
and okay, wait, what did you think of her as a little person? Was she somebody you looked up to, or what kind of relationship or thoughts do you have?
Most definitely. I just thought she was beautiful. She had this beautiful skin and she had the highest cheekbones and she had this beautiful smile and her hair was so pretty and she was tall and she was just beautiful. And I always used to call her a Barbie. I was like, "Oh, you're the brown Barbie." And so I
Hmm.
think I used to embarrass her because I was always just fascinated of how beautiful she was.
Oh, that's wild. The and so I imagine through family you all saw each other over the years and were able to stay connected. How did you find out she had gone missing?
Well, I initially got a phone call from my mother, and she was there with Melissa's family. And they were talking about how she was missing and asked me, what do we do? And in those days, my first answer was always, report everything to the police and make sure you have a description of what she was wearing and anything that the police can have knowledge about Melissa, about her life, about her boyfriend, what you guys think. And, you know, thinking about it 23 years later, I wish I would have done things differently and had different advice for them.
How so?
23 years later, I come to find out that there was very little done by all the agencies, the law enforcement agencies involved. And that when I was getting, this is still an open case, we're working on it, that it really appears like it was a cold case. And I believe now that it was a case that had been closed maybe within the year after she had been missing.
Mhm. So when they were saying to the family and saying to you all that they were actively pursuing it, it had actually gone cold months or within the year. Was there a specific agency responsible for it, or was it multiple agencies? You had mentioned the word agencies.
Correct. I think one of the issues that we see a lot in Indian country is that Melissa went missing from Dulce, New Mexico, which is on the Jicarilla Apache Nation, which is in the northwestern part of the state of New Mexico. But they are on the border of Colorado. So within probably, I would say, 4 to 5 miles, you can be into Colorado. And Melissa lived in Colorado. So to get from her home in Dulce to her home in Colorado, the jurisdictions are the FBI, the BIA, the Jicarilla Police Department, the Rio Arriba Sheriff's Department, the New Mexico State Police, the Archuleta County Sheriff's Office, and the Colorado State Police.
Oh wow. So you were saying she had two homes, or she lived in one place and worked in the other? Was
Well,
that
her childhood home was Dulce, New Mexico. Her family
mm,
and friends, or her family and yeah, all her friends lived there. But then she was living with her boyfriend across the state line in Colorado.
wow. So it's a multitude of so when she goes missing, they had a good idea that she was in Mexico, or was that a debate in the beginning? So Mexico was probably where she went missing, but they're not sure
New
where
Mexico.
she could have been. New Mexico, yeah.
So in New Mexico, the last place she was seen was at this Apache House of Spirits. Every year there's a huge St. Patrick's Day dance and party. And so
Mm,
there was reports from people who had seen her there and seen her boyfriend there with her, who she was in the process of breaking up with. He had been super abusive to her on numerous times. So the last place she was seen was on the Hickory Apache Nation. So then
wow.
it became, okay, who has jurisdiction, where she went missing from, or where her home was located in Colorado.
Yeah. Who eventually took the lead? Do they have tribal police there? in the Hickory Apache? Because I know some use, the Bureau of some reservations use the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Others, have their own tribal police. What was the situation then in 2001?
So in 2001, the Hickory Apache Nation had its own tribal police team, but because it was a missing person, and she, based on what the family had said with the domestic violence, that it could have been a case that was handed over to the FBI, but it was handled by the Bureau of Indian Affairs criminal investigator. But it's very
Mm.
hard to find any reports on this at all.
Oh, wow. So you have a hard time tracking back what actually was happening and who actually was responsible for it.
Correct. And through the years, I had always inquired, and they would say, this is still an active case. And so I feel, for like 23 years, I've been a victim of gaslighting. And I don't like to use that
Mm.
term generally, but that's how I feel now.
Yeah. I remember this phrase, this quote you used about her being faceless. And and that was about the missing persons flyer, which I found so interesting. Because you had said before just now that, your advice to the family, which I think was solid advice, figure out what she was wearing, what she looked like. I imagine part of that was to provide a picture. But
Correct.
yeah, tell me a little bit about.
So throughout this whole time, she has been a silhouette in NamUs. And she wasn't entered into NamUs until quite a long time after she went missing.
And
Um,
that's the National Missing Persons Database run by the Department of Justice,
correct.
NamUs. Yeah.
And so even in the past 5 years, I've contacted them, I've uploaded a picture, and it's never been put with her face. I was able to reach out to the FBI in New Mexico because they do have a monthly list with all of the Native Americans and Navajo Nation tribal members that are missing. And so they did upload her picture. But until I went to CrimeCon and started, talking in the media about my story, they entered her picture about 3 weeks ago into
Wow.
finally after 23 years.
Wow. Wow. And I guess that's an example of the sort of power of public attention. But it's almost like, in some ways, that public attention is coming 2 decades late because we know for a lot of missing persons cases, it's very early on that you have your best shot at getting answers. What was the coverage of her disappearance like then?
There was nothing even until very, very recently. The current stories you're seeing are from the past, maybe since May. And I've been representing her family for 23 years. There was zero coverage. And
Wow.
I think, part of that is I've been really heavy in the murdered and missing Indigenous people movement for the last, I would say, 7 years. But with Melissa's story, some of the facts that play into maybe why her story wasn't looked at for so long is that about 3 months after she went missing, her boyfriend was found dead. And I finally was able to determine that cause of death they said was, I think it was undetermined. And
Mm.
so I think since everyone had thought that he had killed her because he had told her that he would kill her, and we are now just finding out that it's highly probable that he had killed a wife in Texas and
Oh,
then
wow.
was paroled into Colorado.
Oh, wow. So she had shared with family members that she thought, or that his threats, did she think she was in danger? Do you know?
Correct. Yes. And I've been speaking to some of her cousins who had spoken to her that day, and she had told them that day. And they had known since she had been dating this guy that she was in an abusive situation. And they had said, please just leave him. You can stay with us. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is on the Hickory Apache Nation, there's no housing for single females. And if she went back to
Mm.
her childhood home, it was still without electricity and water and things like that. So I kind of felt like she was stuck because there's
Mm.
no domestic violence shelters there. Like she
There
had
was no way for her to come back to the reservation, essentially,
correct.
which is
And
her family and home.
and she had never been one to, go to the big city like Albuquerque, or she was very much on her reservation or just offsite, an hour away from it.
Right. Well, and so when you all found out she was missing, it sounds like he was a suspect very early on, and the police were pointed in his direction. Did he ever end up talking to investigators or sharing anything?
So it really appears, we were lucky because we had a retired state police officer who had been in our community for probably about 20 years and everybody trusted him. So when she went missing, he came back to, kind of assist the family in trying to figure out who would take jurisdiction. And it seems like
Mm.
after he did that and, went back to I believe he was living in Albuquerque, that everything just vanished. Like nothing else was done.
So once he stepped off the scene, was that the? Did you mention him at Crime Con? Was that Gabe Valdez, or was that? Yeah, yeah. And one of the things, so that sounds like having him involved was an up. What have some of the ups and downs been over the years for you and her family in the search for what happened?
It's that not knowing, but kind of know, like, I feel like all of us knew that she was dead because she just wouldn't disappear and not contact her family. It's interesting, but at the 7-year mark, the Hickory Apache Nation determined that she was dead because they are a tribe that gives its members per capita, which is money, oil revenue, money that goes
Hmm.
directly to the tribal members. And so after 7 years, they no longer were paying that. So everybody believed that she had been killed, but it was just finding her and bringing her home. And you have to remember that everyone in her family has already passed on except for 2 brothers and a sister.
Oh
So
wow.
another hard part is that we drive by that ranch that she lived at in Colorado all the time, a couple times a week, because if you need to get groceries, people generally go to Pagosa Springs, Colorado for groceries. So it's always looking on the side of the road, her family searched for her. And when we're talking a little bit about this domestic violence, one of the things that really struck me as incredibly sad was her cousin had left 2 dogs with Melissa to watch. Well, she
Mhm.
came to Albuquerque for a couple days and her cousin had called to say, hey, we're going to go pick up our dogs. And she said that her boyfriend had killed him. And she
Oh
said, don't
wow.
come here because I'm afraid he's going to kill you.
Wow. Wow. How far was that before she disappeared?
It was within probably 6 months of that.
Wow. Wow. So there were some clues that he was very, very dangerous. Along the way, have there been, any credible sort of theories about where she is?
And I think, yes, for me, I've always believed that she was located on the ranch that they lived on, which was a family ranch of her boyfriend's. And so in my mind, I was like, I'm never going to be able to find her until that ranch sells and there's new owners.
Mm.
So he had also told her that he would kill her and, put her in the wood stove and, get rid of her that way. He had also said that he would kill her and feed her to the pigs. I mean, just
Oh
really
wow.
gruesome ways of killing her and disposing of her body.
Why do you think, and I think this is something people don't understand about domestic violence in general, um, and it may be also compounded for Native women. Why do you think she didn't leave?
I believe, just like other women, that they say it takes 7 times to leave your abuser after you actually leave him. But for her, she didn't have a vehicle. She really didn't have a support system within the Hickory Apache Nation at that time. They didn't have a domestic violence program. And I think she was embarrassed to have to go stay with her cousins because, oftentimes in her community, there's, two generations living in a home because it's very hard to have homes and find homes. Just housing is such a hard, a hard way of housing is just very hard for people to get into.
Yeah.
So I just felt like she thought she had no options. And I think, growing up with your self-esteem always being in question, because I think in any community that you live in, there's the haves and the have-nots. So she came from
Right.
a family that was, the have-nots, and then also a family where she was considered not a fully enrolled member. And so that was also very hard for her. And then when
Was
you're,
that was that because she was mixed race?
yes.
Or okay.
And then you have to think too, because, her family was poor in those days. Nobody really encouraged her to go to college or to get a better education, or that there was a life outside of this reservation. I don't believe that she had ever traveled outside of the state unless it was to Pagosa Springs, Colorado. So when you don't have a lot of options growing up and you only see what today holds for you, I think it was very hard for her to leave, because at least she had, this beautiful ranch, and she tried her hardest to be a good girlfriend and cook and clean and be a good ranch hand. And I think she was just trying to change him and trying to prove to him that she could be loved and she could be everything that he wanted her to be. And that was
Yeah.
a detriment.
And it creates this crazy loop where you think that the abuse you're getting is because you're not being good enough, which makes you work harder, and you still get the abuse because it's really about the abuser. And just listening to what you said, like a couple things, she didn't have the car. She wasn't encouraged to further her schooling, that housing on the reservation was difficult to find, that there wasn't um, housing before. Like two things sort of come to mind, and even her mixed race and not being fully enrolled. So many of the things that you said there, people in America are struggling with many of those things, but many of those things seem to be exasperated by what's happened to Native communities in what's now the United States and probably all of the Americas since, Columbus had first contact in the Caribbean. And I have a hard time thinking of this case without thinking of the broader picture that leads us down this road to this woman you describe as a beautiful, kind woman not getting any coverage, feeling like she had no opportunity. I, I, I have a hard time believing that the situation would be the same if she were a young European, white, blonde woman in Denver or in a middle school place. Do you think that those broader issues played a role in the way that her case was handled?
I think definitely the fact that, we can look back 23 years later, nobody did care about her except for her family. Nobody looked for her except for her family. And so, in a sense, what she thought was true was true.
Right.
And, if she was blonde haired, and think of this, you know, blonde haired woman goes missing from this beautiful ranch in, southern Colorado, and she just went to the St. Patrick's Day dance and then she vanished. Everybody would be looking for her.
Yeah, it would be on Nancy Grace tonight. I mean that night. Yeah.
And especially
Yeah.
because her boyfriend was very attractive, very muscular, very good looking, and even when he died, the police didn't really investigate his case. They're like, oh, he's dead.
Mm. Was he native or non-native?
He was non native, he was Hispanic. His family had been in the area probably since the same time my family, Melissa's family, since, 1876.
Mm. What happened in 1876 that brought the families there?
Well, for one, that's when the land grants were being given and the Homesteading Act from the United States. So my family moved into what is now the Hickory Apache Nation 10 years before it was a reservation.
I was recently talking to someone about land grants and, tribal rights to former lands and other things like that. And they made a really good point. They said that the land grants only came after the land grabs.
Yeah.
And, which is the sort of history of the United States. If you go back to it, I don't know, you go back to forever, in our history, uh, but certainly around the time of Andrew Jackson and other people like that, Jackson always catches my attention. I know this is a bit of an aside because I was down in Nashville recently when we were at CrimeCon, and the Hermitage, which is a museum, and it was his former plantation, was there. And it struck me that visiting the Hermitage, you are standing on land that was in land grabs, stolen from Native Americans, given to a white man so he could bring 9 and then eventually 110 slaves to work that land. And I just thought to myself, sitting there, you know, I'm sitting in this spot at this convention where I'm hearing about um, this, these issues for people of color, for Native Americans when it comes to being victims of crimes and the way their families were treated. And here's the Hermitage where Andrew Jackson is being celebrated. And like that contrast for me, it's like every time I go to the White House and I see Black Lives Matter protesters out in front of the gate, standing underneath a statue of Andrew Jackson, it just strikes me that we as Americans have a real hard time reconciling and fixing some of these issues because of our unwillingness to face them. And that kind of like your point about her being a faceless silhouette, we kind of look away and dehumanize because we don't want to look at all the things that went into moments like her case.
Correct. Which is so what many families across this nation are facing.
For you noted some of the challenges that Indigenous communities are facing. And I know you had, worked as a public defender in Albuquerque, various different roles from health to insurance in legal areas for the state of New Mexico. What kind of challenges did you see there for Indigenous families in general?
Well, I think, for one, when it came to the public defender, I saw Native Americans being arrested for very minor crimes and getting jail time for it, where their white counterparts were not receiving the same treatment. I felt within the criminal justice system that instead of trying to heal people, it was to punish when it was, simple things like trespassing or public intoxication. Instead of working on getting them sober and clean, it was putting them in jail.
Right. And you saw sort of a disparity in treatment
Most
um,
definitely.
with those cases. Yeah. And that's also another thing about the criminal justice system when you are young. Yes, a part of it is punishment. Some of it's supposed to be about rehabilitation, for some people who are dangerous and incapacitation so they can't harm the community. And there are a number of reasons for sentencing. But once you get pulled into the cycle at a young age, I think one thing people don't understand is, once you get charged and you end up on probation, it's easier to get sucked back in.
No,
And
most definitely.
then, right. And then you meet more criminals and it's easier to get sucked back in. And I was talking to a friend recently who, he's native, he's Ojibwe, and he lives in Minnesota. And he was saying to me that, and he works in emergency medicine, part of the reason why they have such a hard time hiring um, emergency medical technicians and training them is because so many people, so many young people, have petty criminal charges that prevent them from being certified, perfectly qualified people who at a young age got charges that should have been expunged or deferred or other things like that. So it sounds like you saw something similar to that happening. How do you think that impacts opportunity for people?
I think one of the things that we have to realize too is that where Melissa comes from, it is very, very rural. It takes you an hour to get the nearest place where you can actually buy groceries that don't come from a small store on the reservation. And here in New Mexico, to get lots of your care, you have to come to Albuquerque to the Indian Health Service. So people will come here and then maybe their car breaks down or something like that happens. And then they're not able to get back to the reservation. So that's how they end up on the streets.
Mm. How do you think for Melissa when you think of her case? I'm just curious based on something you said before because I'm thinking of my a friend of mine who's half Native and half white, and I'm thinking myself as a Black American who grew up primarily when I was younger in white communities, and I had this feeling that for me I was never Black enough for most of the Black people, and and it definitely wasn't white enough for the white people. That I imagine too for people who either aren't fully enrolled or are close to not being fully enrolled because they're near half and half, that probably complicates it as well.
Correct. And I think, if you look at races, Native Americans are the only race that have to prove their blood quantum. Who else proves blood quantum? It's dogs
Right.
and horses. So already you're trying to eliminate a culture by blood quantum. So I think for
Mm,
Melissa, when we all grew up, things were very different because everybody was equal. It was a huge community. And I think with the change of the per capita in the tribe, that's when we started to see a division against enrolled members, non-enrolled members, half-breeds, Nakaya, which is Hispanics, and that kind of made things different. But, for me, I've always thought my community was all the people around me, regardless of the color of their skin.
mhm.
And so, but for Melissa, it was harder because in that hierarchy, she's towards the bottom because, she was lighter skin. And I think as far as her Hispanic side, that was never an issue because we just always thought we're all the same, we're just all people.
Yeah. And that a lot of the things that you found beautiful about her kind of worked against her with other people, it sounds like. Like
Correct.
you had mentioned that she was just so beautiful, and I imagine part of that was her the difference that she was different.
Correct. She had really, really high cheekbones and, just beautiful hair and just a really beautiful smile. And, you know, um, she always had like the style about her. And, she was so pretty because then she had these big brown eyes and they
Mm,
were almost like doughy brown eyes. And to me, she
mm,
had like a perfect nose and her hair was just perfect. And, she was beautiful and she was just so nice. And to think that she didn't have the same opportunities that I had. And then I think back and I think, gosh, maybe I really need to go back into my community and talk at the schools and let all the little girls know that they can be whatever they want to be.
right. Yeah, because that must have been on some level shocking for you at that moment. Like I think about growing up and realizing that moment for me where I was, and I know it, I dead know it. I'm a little kid and I'm watching TV and I see that the Klan is marching north of Atlanta. And it was this like heartbreaking moment where I realized, oh wait, race does still matter. I imagine for you going from seeing her as beautiful to realizing throughout the process that a lot of those things that you found so deeply beautiful were working against her in the case, that must have been really shocking or gut wrenching or disappointing, maybe.
Well, and I think like for me, that just made me realize that regardless of what you look like, you know, on the outside, who you are on the inside, that you're just not going to get national media attention when you're Native American or a person of color. Because, like you said, if she had been blonde with all the attributes she had and her situation where she was living on this huge ranch, it was kind of Yellowstoney, that things would have been different. And even with me, I look back and I think, gosh, I'm really lucky that we had that bookmobile that came to our town once a week, and I would check out all those books where, I could be a lawyer or I could live in New York City, or, it just broadened my horizons. And I came from a family that was very intact and, was lower middle class, but we always knew that we were going to college and that was going to be our role. And no matter what people said, that was not going to determine our, the greatness that we could have. But also growing up knowing that we all have a responsibility for our community and that our creator gives us talents. And I really think that MMIW picked me. I didn't pick MMIW.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing what the little differences, that book cart example that you gave, that put you on this, put you on this path. The one of the things that really struck me in your remarks at CrimeCon was, this was the first time. Now, I've heard it privately, right, among my friends, but it was the first time publicly I had heard someone talking about missing and murdered Indigenous people who was openly critical of the way that tribal leadership showed up in these cases. And it really, it hit me, and I knew it wasn't new for a lot of people in the room. It hit me in the sense that, I tend to think of it as the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the FBI and locals not, collaborating or coordinating. And I tend to put like the white angel hat on all of tribal leadership. But it seemed to be that you were suggesting that in some cases, and probably not every reservation, certainly not every reservation, tribal leadership themselves only show up when it's helpful for them.
I think what I learned is that we can all say that MMIWR, and I don't like to use people. I like to use murdered, missing Indigenous women and relatives, because anyone can be people,
Mm.
but a relative is someone that's close to our heart and that we can
Yeah.
relate to. But
Yeah.
I do feel with a lot of tribal nations that they don't make this a number one priority. And because they're sovereign, and that they have the capacity to band together and force the FBI to take a more active role, force the BIA to take a more active role, or even hire attorneys like myself that just work on murdered, missing Indigenous women cases. So, like with the Navajo Nation, I represent, gosh, I would say like 17 or 18 of their members. And I've had to constantly send them emails and messages. And at one time, the previous president, Nez, had offered one of the families a $10,000 reward in the LMA Begay case, which
Mm.
he never gave the $10,000 reward. And I spent probably $10,000 of my time trying to chase it. And just
Is that the case that is currently on the podcast Stolen by Connie Walker?
correct.
Yes. And so what you're saying is that the tribal leadership offered a $10,000 reward, never came through on it, but you and others probably spent way more than that searching for her?
Well, no, trying to collect
An
the
answer. I mean, searching for
$10,000.
answers.
No, just searching to try to get our $10,000 by calling.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I think the LMA Begay family probably spent, $100,000 in time and, efforts walking and searching and food and gas and wear and tear on their vehicles. But I have a case now, the Jamie Ozzie case out of Pinon, Arizona. It's in Phoenix Federal Court. And for the past month, I've been sending emails and text messages to tribal leaders on the Navajo Nation about possibly sponsoring the press conference and providing the meal for the feeding, because generally Native Americans, if they have an event, they always provide food for the attendee.
Mm.
And so not until I sent a letter to outside companies and outside Indian tribes did I finally get a response. But in that letter, I had to put, we're expecting the national press. We already have the Associated Press, CBS, and some other national media outlets coming. And Gabby Petito's mom, Nikki, will be attending the sentencing with us. Oh, I sure got called. I got a call from the Navajo Nation's office saying that the president wanted to meet with me. I got a call,
Wow.
council delegates saying, hey, we want to be there. How can we support you? And I'm like, I've had to run around for 2 months trying to get support for this.
And the
And
Council of Delegates, that's the tribal leadership?
yeah, so each part of the Navajo Nation has a council delegate. So, and I really felt like when the president called, like saying like, no, thank you. The Yazzie family has done this for 5 years on their own and nobody has helped them. So it's a little bit too late. But then I thought, well, this may be my only opportunity to sit down with the president of the Navajo Nation and really tell him my true thoughts about how cases are investigated on the Navajo Nation. But then also the Phoenix federal court has pushed the sentencing back again. So it was supposed to be in January, and now it's pushed back to July. So I just spent like the last month going crazy about preparing the victims to tell their story, to make sure they have lodging and that they have gas and that we have food and we have a place for the press conference, notifying all the press with press releases. And now it's like, okay, we're going to have to reschedule. And I think this is like the 6th time it's been rescheduled, or 7th.
Oh, wow.
And so can you imagine that emotional stress on her 3 boys who have to prepare
Right.
every time for this sentencing hearing?
Right. And all the family members and friends, and there's so much collateral.
I mean, like 5.5 hours from Pinon, Arizona to the federal courthouse in Phoenix. And then her father's side is from Navajo, New Mexico and Albuquerque, New Mexico. So virtually that's another 7 hours. So and I think maybe the reason why tribes don't get involved, they're like, why? Darlene's taking care of it. She's got it all down. She does fundraising and press releases and counseling and all these other things. So maybe it's like, oh, well, she offered to do it for free, so we don't have to do anything.
I was going to ask you 2 things. One was, when you met with the president of the Navajo Nation, do you feel that these cases are an important priority to him? And do you feel like you got through about what some of the problems were?
Well, they just called me yesterday about meeting with him. So that meeting has yet to take place. They have to call me to schedule that.
Okay. So hopefully there is an opportunity to get through.
Correct.
Well, if you had him here, what would the message be that you'd give him?
I would say that, for one, you need to train your criminal investigators and your police officers how to take better reports and to have priorities and to actually investigate these cases. And number 2, you need to spend more funds on recruiting police officers. Number 3 would be like, you need to show up for these families and show that you care and come to rallies and meet with families and follow through with what you promised them. And you need to make MMIW a priority because you're the largest tribe in the entire nation and you have the power to make things happen because you represent a large portion of Native Americans. And so at Congress, he could make a difference.
Right.
He can make a difference because he can say, look, I have, 95 people from my reservation missing. And this is what it means to me. And he could have these press conferences and he could get on podcasts like this and talk about the families and talk about the needs. But he's just not visible. He's visible, going to different places, different events like basketball games and football games and art shows and to Nike Corporation. And this is what the families are telling me. Like they think that he would rather go other places than go to the rallies. So, but I
Mm.
look forward to having an honest conversation with him. And, he's welcome to ask me anything that he feels like he wants to ask me. And hopefully that we can come up with a solution on how to bring down the number of MMIWR victims on the Navajo Nation.
Did you say 95? 95 right now?
That's correct.
Wow. That's
And
wild. And the total population of the Navajo Nation is.
I don't have the direct numbers for how many live on reservation, but I believe the reservation is the size of Rhode Island.
I actually think it's bigger. I was recently talking to somebody who told me that it's the size of West Virginia, but only has 13 grocery stores.
And
Isn't that crazy?
yeah, so maybe it's West Virginia, but I saw it Rhode Island on something.
They might be near the same size.
I better fact check myself on that one.
Oh, no worries. What we can say is it's larger than several states.
Correct.
The because I think I only have old data, but I think in the old data I had it was like 160,000 or something like that on the 100. It was somewhere between 160 and 170,000 people in the Navajo Nation. And then I look at some of these statistics and it makes my head spin. Like a Native American woman, 12 times more likely to experience violence than their counterparts.
Right.
Yeah, their white counterparts. And then, half of Native American women have experienced sexual violence. Like that idea of being able to sit in a room with a bunch of women and turn to my left and turn to my right and know that, one or the other has experienced some form of sexual violence.
Correct.
It just strikes me that if this was happening to cats in a suburb in, I don't know, Greenwich, Connecticut, it would be on the front page of every newspaper and there would be outroar, right? Like if that many cats were going missing from Greenwich, Connecticut, it would be on the front page of the New York Times.
And I think for me, because my nieces and nephews are, enrolled tribal members, the majority of, half of my cousins, a lot of my friends and their children. And when I look out and I see them playing, I'm like, how can I help them now? Because 86% of those women or those little girls that I see playing out there are going to be victims of a violent crime.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
1 out of 2, like I look at that seesaw and one of those little girls is going to be sexually assaulted.
Mm. What do you think the reasons are for that violence, that level of violence and sexual assault?
I think for one, if you're not going to be arrested or charged with anything, because if you look at the number of cases where there's actually arrest or when the police actually investigate, it's very low. And so I think perpetrators are like, hey, I can keep perpetrating and, nobody's going to hold me accountable. And I think,
Mm.
with the introduction of alcohol and drugs by cartels, that, some Native Americans can become very violent.
Mm.
And if you live in the middle of nowhere and you don't have running water and you don't have, electricity and even to have just a clean
And you don't have hope and opportunity.
correct, you don't have hope, you don't have opportunities. And I always use like, can you imagine being in a, 400-foot or even 250 to 400-foot home with, 10 people living there through COVID for, day after day? You can really get on somebody's nerves.
Yeah. 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 And we saw that across the country. And I can only imagine how bad it could be there. Some of us can, make large donations to charities or, find new nonprofits, but that's not everybody. I wanted to throw this out there for you. Like, if I heard tomorrow about a missing Native person and about their families searching for them. Whether I heard it in the news, I heard it in the neighborhood. What can I, as just the average person, do to help them? Join the search?
You can join the
Give
search,
some
you can
money?
share the
Yeah.
flyers. You can just send them, a message over Messenger and just say, we're thinking about you. Let us know how we can help you. Do you need, water or gas cards, or how can I help you? Or just, simple, I'm thinking about you. I'm praying for you. I, hope that your daughter's found, because it's very lonely to be on this trail looking for your loved one alone. Because
Yeah.
oftentimes, there's a lot of self blame. Well, maybe I shouldn't have taken her over there. Maybe I should have insisted that she stay with me. Um, and that's really hard because, I can think back on Melissa and I think about, gosh, today I'm a far different woman than I was back then. Now, I have a mouth. And one of the things my mom, before she passed away, she had dementia and she kept asking, ¿Qué pasó con ella? Where is Melissa? What happened to her? Find her.
Mm,
And to me, it's like my mother came through this world without knowing that Melissa was somewhere that she needed to be found and brought to where her family's burial site is, next to the river in this beautiful spot where their home was. And
your
that was
mom needed that for peace.
her piece. Like she couldn't leave this world without, making sure that I knew how important it was to find Melissa.
Yeah. She kind of passed the baton,
Correct.
let you know. Yeah.
And it was interesting
Wow.
because the way my mom acted after Melissa went missing, she was always calling, where are you at? Don't go by yourself. Like if you go somewhere with someone, make sure you come with them. And when she was in the hospital, she's like, don't leave my side. She was always afraid of somebody going missing. And then she would also tell me the stories about when she was younger and the domestic violence that she witnessed in the community and women going missing back then and men.
Wow. So it's trauma, right? That's example of the generation upon generation upon generation of trauma, right? Your mom experienced it when she was younger, and then Melissa going missing and everything else she saw, and you're having to to fight it yourself in modern times. And it's so you think that your mom, when did your mom pass away?
It's going to be 3 years and about 2 weeks.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. But,
I
for her,
am.
she was just shy of her 92nd birthday. So she lived a great life and she,
Oh, that's a blessing.
left all these fabulous traits about how we take care of each other and how we try to leave this place a better place than when we found it.
Mm, yeah. It sounds like you found peace.
Correct.
My mom, she died last year in October. And I remember, so I've worked in psychology, and, as much as we learn and as much as we think we know, right? When a client or someone else loses someone close, we use this language about people getting through their grief.
Yes.
I don't think it ends.
Correct.
I think maybe it's just finding that peace in the grief, and you being there for your mom was a part of, to carry on that search was a part of her peace.
Correct.
And this sounds like it's a part of yours too. You had mentioned before, the case, the case that we were talking about before, and the sentencing, and the issues with the Navajo Nation. Would you mind giving a quick summary of what had happened in that case and why you think and it's gotten nowhere near as much attention if a elderly white woman, like I was saying, in Greenwich, Connecticut, disappeared, but why you think that case is resonating?
I think with Jamie Ozzie, she's kind of our Gabby Petito of Indian country. We were able to really get a lot of movement on TikTok and Facebook using social media, doing TikTok videos in Navajo with her grandmother speaking. their native tongue, and just, sending lots of press releases to the media in Arizona, even in New Mexico, that, Jamie's case got some traction. But with her, she went missing on June 30th, and there was calls to the Navajo Nation Police Department that they heard a woman screaming and guns and gunfire. But the Navajo Nation Police didn't go to the call until 4 days later.
Oh, wow.
And then the FBI came in a day after that.
Wow.
And so, they did not proceed with this case, even though they knew that she had been a victim of domestic violence and that, it was highly probable that her boyfriend killed her. They didn't name him as a suspect. They didn't investigate him until, far later. It, to me, appears like once they did the warrants, that this case sat cold. And then when they found Jamie's body on the Hopi reservation, that's when I felt like they started working the case.
Mm.
The FBI started working the case.
Mm. And the Hopi reservation is a small reservation that's inside the bigger Navajo Nation, right?
Well, it's like their borders
bordered, yeah.
And Hopi is much smaller than Navajo, so
I know they cooperate.
Like, I almost feel like her killer, Trey James, knew, like, okay, I'm going to dump her over here across the border because that's going to be adding another jurisdiction. And what I find really sad in this case is that because he was not arrested immediately, that he had the opportunity to victimize 3 other women and perpetrate on them. And those would also call the police, but the police never sent those reports to their criminal investigators and to the FBI. So when the FBI started investigating Jamie's case, they found these 3 other victims, and they were very brutally beat. They were kidnapped. One woman described the fact that she was running away from Trey James, and he grabbed her by the hair and drug her through the sand and dirt. And as they were nearing the house, there was dog feces on the ground, and he picked it up and shoved it in her mouth.
Wow.
And then there was...
And he didn't get arrested for that?
Correct. And there was another victim who said that he had beat her up and then forced her to get naked, and then he put her in this old bathroom filled with like rats, and she could feel the rats crawling on her and nibbling on her.
Wow.
For a whole day. And then the other victim had talked about they were driving on that same road that near where Jamie's body was found, and that he was beating her up, and he was telling her, I could kill you and I could leave you right here. And then he was talking about how he was going to kill her children. And it was brutal actions. And, if the body of Melissa or the body of Jamie Ozzie hadn't been found, then he'd still be out there perpetrating. And he was already in his late 20s. So can you imagine how many women he's perpetrated since being a teenager?
Right. Or how many he would have if he had another 20 years. Mm-hmm. I know you had first worked in private practice, and then, and had, come back to work for the Hickory Apache Nation as a general counsel, and have had experiences inside and outside of the system. And I know one of those moves to come back to the area because your brother had died?
Correct.
What had happened to your brother?
It's really sad. He was in a horseback accident, and it caused him to almost have conditions like you see in professional football players and boxers with all the concussions he had being a cowboy. So
CTE and traumatic brain injuries.
Brain injury that was, really eating his brain. So for him, we brought him back home, and he ended up committing suicide. But the more that I think about it, it was the parties that were around him who basically set him up to do that.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for one, I speculate that he was becoming, too hard to handle for his wife. I had
Mm.
become his guardian. So I just think that, we were all told that he wasn't supposed to have any firearms with him. And there was 7 firearms in the home. There was bullets.
Wow.
We were told by law enforcement that bullets had been purchased by him the day before. And
Wow.
so just comments made by his wife at the time, um, because I don't really believe he was in that of frame of mind to be able to set up a rifle to.
To orchestrate it. Yeah. Like,
Right.
one of the saving graces that we say in mental health is that often when people are so depressed that they're suicidal, they also can't function.
Correct.
It's, yeah. And that probably saves a lot of lives. And, it wouldn't be the first time we've heard of a case of someone helping someone along.
Yeah,
It
and so
sounds like you've been
yeah,
through so much.
and I think for me, when I look back at it, he died on the reservation. And I remember the BIA officer just saying, "Oh, well, he was sick, so he didn't investigate it at all." And I remember that I didn't have anyone to help me. And so, looking back, if I can be help to families and to be able to lead them in the right direction, then I want to be able to provide that because I didn't have that, even though I was an attorney and, I was probably capable of taking it to the next level. I just kind of, went with the flow.
Yeah. Well, I don't think any of us are capable of very much when we're in that sorry, that depth of our grief. Um when I was gonna ask you, just sort of stepping back and thinking about some of these challenges that you talked about for the tribal, federal, state, local law enforcement, for the families, for the friends, for the rest of us who care about these things when it comes to sort of missing and murdered Indigenous people and their relatives. And in my world, we're all relatives,
Yeah.
um, all of us. And what solutions would you recommend, maybe to address some of those
I
challenges?
really think that we all need to write our congressmen and say that, the FBI needs to make Indian country more of a priority. And they shouldn't consider Indian country a hardship and send brand new um, agents there. That it should be, a privilege to work in Indian country, and you should have all the tools as an FBI agent to be able to work in these communities because so many of our agents don't even know a Native American or Alaska Native or a Hawaiian Native. So I think that's one thing. And then I really think that the FBI needs to have a complete audit in the way it handles cases in Indian country because, it seems like everything is hidden under this veil of ongoing investigation or retractions when you try to get records. So I really think that we need to make sure that the FBI follows its trust responsibility, and that takes all of us to write to our Congress members. And then I think number 2 is just sharing flyers and bringing attention. And if there's a MMIW event in your area, definitely go and um, attend it and just learn more about it.
Yeah. I was thinking about all those things about the federal government and the FBI making it more of a priority. And I think to myself, like, yes, the FBI does have a special because of the tribal agreements, a special role on native reservations. But it just, like, even you having to say those words for the FBI to make it more of a priority makes me feel like there's just this systemic othering of Native people. I was lucky when I was a kid. I grew up in among other places, Georgia, and my parents were both black, but also from varied backgrounds. Because when you pull up my DNA, it looks quite strange. It's everywhere. Um, but they would take us to burial grounds, to events, to even I remember going to a powwow as a kid. And actually, this weekend I was supposed to go to one in Minnesota, but I will be going to one in Minnesota in in August. But one of the things, and I love learning about all sorts of different cultures, but one of the things for me is growing up, I never looked at Native Americans as another culture in the sense like they were an other.
Uh,
I just looked at them as a set of Americans who had different backgrounds than me. And I feel like some of the problem is like this attitude of we need to help these other people, not we need to help our brothers and sisters who live in this country. And there's just something about that just doesn't sit well for me.
well, I think, what we learned about American Indians in textbooks is so wrong. So,
Yeah.
the country in itself needs to tell history like it is, the truth about Native Americans and the colonization of the Americas. And
Yeah.
so often, the story of Pocahontas, it's not this Disney fairy tale, but she was actually, bought. And
Yeah. I mean, it's enslavement,
yeah,
stolen in some ways.
correct.
Yeah. I, well, thanks again for coming on. I wanted to see if you had, before we wrap up, just any closing thoughts. I'm, an issue obviously that I care about, but I was very moved both by the stories you told and the fight that you're fighting. Um, so any, I'd love to hear about what's next in the fight for you and any closing thoughts you have for people.
Yeah, so definitely, I think one of my fights is, a fight that I had this morning where the bones of Melissa Montoya initially said it was a Native American female and it was entered into NamUs. But then I received an email saying, or after I continued to reach out to law enforcement, I received an email saying, oh, sorry, by the way, those were men's bones, not women's bones. So,
Oh man.
yeah. So currently, the bones that we thought were Melissa remain or are those of a male Native American. So,
What?
I brought up a lot of issues with the governor's office. I tried to reach out to her. She said that they didn't have jurisdiction, put me in touch with the Department of Health secretary. And then, it's just like calling all these people. But what I learned is that New Mexico lacks so much funding that in order to have everybody give their DNA sample, it has to go to law enforcement, and law enforcement has to put into CODIS, and then New Mexico has to have enough money to test bones against, this DNA database in New Mexico. And, I brought up the issue that Native American sovereign tribes don't put their data into this DNA bank. So my new fight is trying to figure out how we can get families in New Mexico to give DNA to this DNA, New Mexico DNA bank, New Mexico DNA systems. So that way we can ensure that there's not bodies at OMI that are being left there.
Oh, and that you could use familial DNA because one of the big problems is we don't have enough Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, or Native Americans to adequately
Correct. So if we can get
identify.
So we can get family members immediately to give a DNA swab so it goes into a system, and that whenever bones are found, then it can be matched against everybody in that system.
Wow.
So
Now
that's
that's a cause.
yeah, that's my cause. But I think that, I feel like that's something I can do. It's always interesting because when I bring up like, hey, can I do some consulting for you and I can get this done? They're like, oh, sorry, we don't have any funds. And I'm like, you expect me to do this for free? So I always think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
You
It well,
want me to do it for free? I don't think so.
yeah. No, it's I think it ties back, I think, to part of what uh we were saying before. And I hate to put it this way, but You know, I think things that, and I say the we collective because I want to take responsibility as an American, the things, and obviously this is something I care about as a person, but things that we don't care about, we want on the cheap, right? Like we don't want to put in the effort to build, again, I hate to go back to poor Connecticut, but what we would be doing there if something like this was happening. Well, Darlene, I am grateful for your time. I'm grateful for your fight. If there is anything I can do along the way to be of assistance, either through this platform or many of my wild set of skills we haven't talked about entirely, please let me know.
Yeah, and I would love, your listeners can go to my law firm website, dargomezlaw.com, and see, the families that I represent and do some research. And I'm really happy to announce that I'm starting a nonprofit, and it's called MMIW Indian Country. So it's MMIW.org or MMIWR.org. So it's Murdered Missing Indigenous Women and Relatives in Indian Country. So, we're in hopes of being able to train other attorneys to take on cases, because currently I'm the only attorney in the United States that takes cases pro bono. So I'm already at like 2.3 million from 2019 to the start of 2024.
Wow. Well, I think that's an awesome cause, and that's definitely I'll definitely put that in the notes in the show too, so everyone can get access to that. And one last thing I was going to ask you, if people go to your website and see some of the cases you're on, is it okay for them to reach out to see how they could help the families too?
Yeah, most definitely.
Okay.
That would be amazing. And a couple of the families have a donate button, so you can donate to them, individual families, or you can donate to the law firm for traveling expenses, for water, for, posters. One of the things is the flyers have gotten to be so expensive now. They're well over $1 a flyer.
Oh, wow. So it's even the little things, anything that people can do.
Correct. Or, even sending gas cards or cards for like McDonald's or Walmart, anything like that.
That can all be helpful.
Yes.
So there's something anybody can do to help,
Correct.
whether it's giving money or giving love and support or
sharing a flyer, or just reaching out and being like, we appreciate you.
Yeah. I would want a lot of them searching for me if I went missing. Unless, of course, I did it on purpose. But in that case, I would not want them searching for me.
We also hear from law enforcement like, oh, we find so many people, but it's like those long-term missing people. And I think families kind of know patterns. So if somebody calls every day at noon and then that doesn't happen, something's wrong.
Right. Right. And on that note, if you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-driven Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you all again next week.